Don't get me wrong, even though if we generate revenue, like I say we, the clinical trial teams, they're still not funded well.
Yeah.
They're still under-resourced, right? And that's because of the infrastructure of NHS and the departments. So, as I said, for example, we generated 4 million in COVID research, right?
But it doesn't
now,
come
if you
to
don't
you.
have the right person
Yeah.
in that clinical team, that you're not seeing that money.
Right. Do you think there are too many people making these decisions that there needs to be?
Yes, we do have a lot of people that making decision, but my issue is not that. My issue is how effective are they? Are they in their roles? How are we holding them accountable for their roles?
It takes 10 to 15 years for a molecule or a drug to from identification to market launch. 15 years, right?
Yeah.
In terms of clinical trials,
Yeah.
it takes 6 to 7 years just to do trial, and it can be longer if the disease is complex.
Yes.
And then, this is great, the regulatory review can take up to 2 years as well. All of these things cost more and more money. The more you delay it, the longer you stretch it, the more millions you're adding.
Absolutely.
And the total cost to bring a new drug to market from identification can range from anywhere between $1 billion to $10 billion.
Yeah.
Our relationship with money is broken in this country,
Yeah.
where, you know, anything that generates money is somehow seen as a bad thing
Exactly.
within the NHS,
Exactly.
which I think it needs to break. My guest today is Nargis Hemat, who has spent nearly a decade working in healthcare research at one of the biggest London teaching hospitals, progressing all the way from research coordinator to specialist leads research manager. During that time, she led pivotal studies in HIV medicine, COVID-19, vaccine development, pushing boundaries of what's possible for patient care. She also holds an impressive academic background, a bachelor's degree in biomedical sciences, a master's in neurosciences, both from King's College London, and has an executive MBA with distinction from Bayes Business School. And after completing her MBA, she took a bold leap into the pharmaceutical industry and now serves as an associate director in clinical operations at a leading pharma company. What sets Nargis apart is her straightforward, no-nonsense attitude and her ability to adapt in the ever-evolving healthcare landscape. I've personally witnessed her remarkable leadership in action, and I'm thrilled to have her here to share her insights on clinical research, driving innovation, and advocating for meaningful change within the NHS. Nargis. Welcome to Dose of Health.
Thank you. Thank you, Abby. That was a very impressive introduction.
Yeah.
I hope I have done enough to actually stand up to everything you've said about me, but thank you.
I'm sure you have.
Thank you.
I mean, let's address the elephant in the room, right? I'm forcing you to do this.
Yes, yes, he is.
You,
He absolutely is. I can't say no to you.
yeah. And you
Yeah.
hate being in front of camera, you hate being in front of limelight. And I'm like, no, Nargis, you have to do it.
This is the most uncomfortable I have felt in a very long time, and I don't see this very often. So, but here we are.
But, you know, one of the reasons why I asked you to do it, and I wanted to admit it on camera, is that throughout my time I've known you, which is like over a decade.
Yes.
And we've worked together,
I know.
and you are one of the most authentic person I know, who kind of like wears her heart on the sleeve. You say it how it is. It doesn't matter whether you're speaking to a nurse or a consultant or whoever. And, you know, you're not afraid to be vulnerable as well, which I think is a
a good thing.
strength, not weakness.
Thank you.
And that's why you're here.
Thank you.
Let me start, you know. So what we're talking about today is clinical trials,
Yeah.
right? So in your role within the NHS, you oversaw plenty of clinical trials, right? And when you talk to a common person
Yeah.
and they see some expert talking about
Yeah.
some medicine, they will say, oh, studies showed this and this,
Yeah.
research showed this and that.
Yes.
But not a lot of people know what a clinical trial is.
Yes.
So in a very simple language, what would you say is a clinical trial, and how does it typically unfold?
Okay, I think it's a good way to start there. And simply put, I'm not going to go into the detail of it. Clinical trial is a very complex way of doing research. And we talk about research in so many ways, right? So research is lab-based, research is done in pharmaceutical industry behind. So it's like bench to bedside research. You must have heard all these terms. But what clinical trial is research for sure, but it is in human subjects, okay? So human participants, we should say. So it's a volunteering of human participant to take part in clinical trials, which is a research, to then test out and understand medication.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be just medication. It could be a device.
Right.
It could be a new procedure.
Right.
But we conduct clinical trials in a very safe environment for all these human participants taking part in the clinical research to understand safety and efficacy. And don't ask me to break that down even more.
Yeah.
Efficacy is like how good a medication is
Right.
in our body, for example.
Right.
So we test that
Right.
by conducting clinical trial.
Right.
Right. So it's a very, very important step in actually accessing any new medication. And eventually, if it's a success and we have a good data out of it, then the drug is marketed, and that's the drugs that gets prescribed, for example, or a devices, or a new procedure is compared to what we're doing in a normal day-to-day life at the moment.
Right.
And the second part was that how it unfolds is that clinical, it's, as I said, it's a very structured process. So it has a very controlled elements that are put in place because, of course, you're having a
experimental drug.
Into experimental drugs. So it's a very robust way of conducting it. So you have, for example, to start with, you have a study protocol. And a study protocol will very much clearly list what the objective of that study is, what the intervention is in that given clinical trial, what the eligibility criteria is, what sort of participant we want to include in that, and how do then we assess the safety and collect the data, and how do we analyze it further. So it's all listed out.
Right.
And the process is then you have a protocol, you have an informed consent process, so all the participants are fully consented into whatever they want to sign up for. And then you have baseline data collection. So you assess, is that the correct participant for this given clinical trial? And as I said, you collect data and you evaluate the safety of all of that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's just focus on the trials that test medication or drugs, right? So it will be fair to say that you have a molecule, like let's just say a pharma company or a research identifies this, that, okay, it might be effective for this disease.
Yeah.
And they then come to you, who is representing the NHS, and say that, look, this is a drug and we want patients, right?
Yes.
And you then oversee the safety, the risk mitigation, the whole scenario to make sure the trial runs smoothly from start to finish. Would that be correct?
Yes, partly. I think, are we trying to get to like what my job was potentially in the NHS sector, for example, what I was involved in? So
for now, yeah.
I am one part of this whole picture of how we're conducting clinical trials, right? So yes, I would, for example, when I was in the NHS, we conducted a trials of commercial and academic research. So these are the two big terms that the public will hear about the type of clinical trials that exist for them. If they are in any hospital and they go and talk to any of their consultants, they should inquire about it. What sort of clinical research is happening in that institution or in that department? But coming back to it more specifically, for example, from where I know you, Abby, is in HIV. So I was in a HIV center for very many years. Oh, what a joy that was. And then I was one part of the big picture, as I said. So there's multiple stakeholders involved on the ground to conduct these clinical trials.
Right.
So where I stand, yes, I worked incredibly closely with our leading consultants at the time, who were our principal, we call it principal investigators. So they're the one that
PIs.
take PIs, exactly. They take the accountability for the entirety of that clinical trial at that institution.
Yeah.
So I'll work very closely with them. We will have sponsors. That's another word that I'm throwing quite a lot of words. So the sponsor could be academic or commercial. So commercial is all the pharmaceutical industry research studies that are coming to us. Academic is other NHS institution. And I'll work very closely with them to find out, okay, what trials are you guys doing? And how do we make sure we have these trials at our institution?
Makes sense.
Right? And then how do I identify principal investigators to take ownership from the medical perspective to conduct that study at a site? And I was in charge of the team in terms of operationally, how do we run it? Do we have research nurses? Do we have enough research fellows? Do we have data personnel to collect that data safely? And do we have the patient participants to actually recruit to those studies? So yeah, it was a multiple faceted sort of role, and it was very exciting.
Sounds like a lot of work. What is a benefit for patients, and what is a benefit for the NHS Trust to actually do clinical trials?
Oh, Abby, that's a big question. Huge.
Give it to me.
I'm not saying this because you're working in clinical trials, but if we think about clinical trials from there's a lot of data, there's a lot of research that's already conducted. So any trust that is research active, they have got better patient outcomes. Okay? And that comes from multiple aspects. That comes from the way staffs are trained in that institution, right? The way they are engaged in research. And how do you bring that research then to the forefront of all the patients that you're caring for? So it adds a lot of value, and it adds a lot of positive outcome for these patients. That's one of the things. Then the other big thing for our patient, like let's go back to the HIV story,
one, yes.
Right? It's a great story in clinical trials, and it was the way that they had access to new medication, and they needed that access to new medication, right? And that was a huge thing. And I think with that research, HIV pandemic, that story wouldn't have been what it is right now. And
we're going to talk about it.
We can talk about this. And it's been the most exciting way to look at commercial research, especially because we wanted these pharma companies to really dive into the key these IMPs. So IMPs is investigational medicinal products. So under any
experimental
medicine, exactly, experiment. So we call it IMP in clinical trials. But in terms of patient, and I wanted to go into this, is that it gives them access to new treatments.
Yeah.
Sure, it is tested.
Yeah.
But it is under very robust procedure.
Yeah.
We need to know the potential benefit and the safety aspect of that drug. But equally to that patient is giving access to yet another thing that we can offer to them.
Yeah.
So it's that choice that you have to give to them, right? Yeah. And then what they contribute to the wider society as well. Because without these participants in our clinical trials, we're not going to have any of these innovation in healthcare.
There is nothing worse as a patient, I would imagine, to hear from their doctors to say, sorry, there is nothing else we can do.
Absolutely.
And then and how many times patients hear this, and then come people like yourself, like the department like yourself, to say, hang on a second, we have another option.
Absolutely.
But it's not licensed. And I think it's very important to know that whenever people think of clinical trials, they say experimental drug. But before we are even allowed to give the experiment drug to patients, the amount of preclinical testing that has been done to make sure that it's safe in healthy individuals or the disease that the patients are treating, like it's already so much.
Absolutely.
And once we realize, okay, it's safe enough to give, then we say, okay, that's an option, right?
No, absolutely. And thank you for highlighting that. I think in that sense, it's a whole idea of new drug discovery. And if anybody's listening to this, and if they even type new drug discovery,
patients get scared when they say it's experimental drug.
Exactly. It's not fully experimental, right? We do know something about it. But of course, it's like, and as I said, I think I didn't touch on this, the clinical trials is also in phases. So it starts
tell me about the phases.
Yeah, so it's like phase 1, and then it goes to phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. And these are the typical phases. And the phase 1 is the early stage of a clinical trial. So anybody participating in that, surely it's a little bit more complicated. There's little safety data that we know about it, but it's a very small number of human participants that we actually enroll into a phase 1 study,
Right.
to ensure we collect enough safety data.
Because it's early phase.
It's so early.
It's so early.
It's just going into a human part. And you have that data. And then if it's safe enough, then you move on to the phase 2. And phase 2 is when you increase your numbers slightly more. And now you're looking at safety as well as efficacy, and at what dose do we want to. So as you say, like you're a pharmacist, like there's so many doses of any medication.
That's right.
That's how you identify what dose it is. And then majority of these trials, they run at a much higher level. It's like phase 3, which is then you're increasing the number in thousands.
Patients,
right?
yeah.
Thousands of patients that gets enrolled.
And the duration goes up as well. The length of the study
the length
goes
of
longer.
the study goes up. So then you continue to collect that data around safety and efficacy. And so yes, as you said, it's not like we don't know anything about it. Sure, phase 1 is a little bit more, but then phase 1 is a lot more controlled.
That's right.
The way it's run.
That's right.
So there's huge benefits, I think, coming to your point, for a patient, but even more so, and I dare to say this, even economically, like
yes,
clinical trials is a huge asset for NHS.
Yes.
And what especially what we're going through at the moment.
Yes.
Right, which is the huge crisis around reduction of costs and funding and everything. And if you look into it, I think it was in 2018 data, they collected per one patient that has been enrolled into a commercial trial.
Right.
It brought to an NHS trust £9,000.
Mad.
And plus around £5,000 to £6,000 in cost saving.
Wow.
That equates to, in an economy, if you look at it, is 350 million injected into economy.
Wow.
With around 29 million in cost saving.
Wow.
Right? So, and we can talk about that in a HIV sector, for example, in that world, and what that cost saving really means. But
I actually have the data. So basically, I looked the 2022 data, and its numbers are staggering. Yeah. NHS generated £1.2 billion in revenue from commercial clinical trials in 2022. And if you're talking about wider economy, trials add 7.4 billion to the wider economy, adding 65,000 jobs across the UK, of which 13,000 are directly within the NHS. So you can argue that clinical trials and you guys are perhaps the only or one of the very few departments within the NHS that actually doesn't cost NHS but generate money and actually are in the positive. Yeah. Like you run yourself, which is not really spoken about because NHS is all about taking money in, costing NHS. Yeah. Yeah. But trials is one that actually generates that revenue. A huge revenue. Insane. A huge revenue. And I'm sure we'll get into the COVID research that we did. But, we need to talk about
and we can talk about it. But the initiation of the COVID research, and we can talk about a story about it, but we started from almost nothing. Yeah. And in 3 years, at this one NHS trust, just that one department, we raised 4.3 million.
Insane.
Okay, so it's a huge amount, and it's these figures and everything that you look at. But more than that, Abby, I think what is important is the cost saving. Yes. Right. So, tell me, as a pharmacist, in when we were working at, are we allowed to say the name of the clinic that we worked at? ICDC, the Royal Free Hospital. Yes. So one patient. Why wouldn't be allowed to say it? I don't know.
I mean, it's a great center. We have nothing to say about it.
We had a great time.
We had a great time. Shout out to ICDC.
Absolutely. So one patient, when you prescribe their medication through NHS, what was the cost for that?
Well, without...
Because usually they would be on a 6-month ART or a...
Without giving the exact figure, because that's NHS negotiated price. Yes. The figures can actually go into thousands. So close to like £3,000-4,000. In certain treatments, it can even go higher.
Higher, right? Yes. So we're talking about thousands that we pay per patient for 6 months of their
antiviral treatment,
viral therapy. Yes. Which... people should watch all your episodes because it's
That's
been
right.
very nicely written down.
That's
on
right.
The other effects.
Follow me.
Yeah, absolutely. So now think about cost saving. Now that same patient gets enrolled into a clinical trial, HIV commercial clinical trial.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And we, on average, will get from a pharma company per patient around £9,000 to £10,000
Insane.
for actually doing the work that we did for them.
Insane.
But plus, we're saving the money
Because the treatment's
because
free.
the treatment is free.
Yes.
And they're getting that treatment, potentially better
Yes.
treatment through some of these clinical trials that we were running at the time.
Yes.
So yeah, you're saving quite a lot of
Yes.
cost, and I think that element needs to be. I feel like it needs to be really well understood by a lot of stakeholders.
People need to talk about it.
In
Yeah.
NHS, and I think we frown upon quite a lot when we talk about money in NHS, and it's always about like it's patient care, and of course it is. Of course it is.
But you
It's-
need
it's-
money to run it.
I mean, come on.
You
It's
need
no
money to
brainer,
run it.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
It's
as
not
in,
Garden of
how-
Eden.
Because that's where the problem is arising from.
Exactly.
We don't have enough injected into, the government cannot inject as much as what the NHS really needs to actually sustain all the activity.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you need to find
Ways to generate
alternative
income.
ways
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
effective ways
Exactly.
and safe ways
Exactly.
to generate as well as treat and
Yes.
give that option to your patients.
It seems like a win-win, right? Because from a patient's point of view who are saying, oh, treatment, free at the point of care, well, it is free.
Yeah.
And then the conservative people who are like, oh, where's the money coming from? Well, the money's coming as well, So it
Yeah.
seems to me like a win-win, but
Yeah.
not many people talk about it because you're right. Our relationship with money is broken in this country
Yeah.
where, anything that generates money somehow seen as a bad thing
Exactly.
within the NHS,
Exactly.
which I think it needs to break.
Absolutely.
But I mean, moving on, I want to speak about one of the example of a clinical trial that has now become a commercial drug, and it has literally changed the HIV landscape of how we treat patients, and that's Flair study. So you can say more about Flair, but Flair was within HIV treatment now, instead of taking one tablet every day, you can now have an injection that you inject two injections every 8 weeks. And this was first of its own kind within the HIV, and you ran that study.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
So that's mad. Tell me more about that study.
No, that was great. Actually, I remember a lot about that study because I remember when it was coming, the first time it came, because it was the first of the new innovation
Exactly.
in delivery of these medications.
HIV drugs, yeah.
HIV drugs. So there was quite a lot of hype around it.
Yes.
Huge amount.
Yeah.
I do remember at the time, although I was having a managerial role, but I really wanted to look after patients on that study as well.
Yes.
So I was like, actually, I want to recruit and I want to have like a close interaction with these, just directly working with the nurses and the doctors at the time on Flair study. And yeah, it was great. It was fantastic. And it was that option. For me, it was when we were doing the informed consent process, is that you present this new way of administrating HIV medication. And you gave that option to those patients in terms of what do they want to take on or not. I mean, my experience is going to be maybe controversial or anything like that, or maybe it wouldn't align with what the data at the moment also suggests. This is another thing that we should talk about, is how, if we haven't done that clinical trial, and if I didn't had the first-hand experience of patient onto that clinical trial, there's also very little you would have known about, like, for example, some of the uncomfortable side effects, for instance, from injectables. The idea when it came through is like, oh my God, I don't need to remember my pill every morning.
Yes.
I need to forget about that I have HIV. I just need to come to a clinic once a month.
Yes.
And I'll have an injection and I'll be fine.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And people started recruiting to it.
Yes.
But Abby, we had a lot of dropout.
Right.
On that trial because of the side effect, the uncomfortable side effects.
Right.
These are not big side effects in terms of in life-threatening or anything by any nature.
Just injection side reaction.
It's like a bit of redness or a bit of or uncomfortable feeling for how long, and then but see that was quite important.
Yes.
That was quite important for us to understand it. And I think one of the other thing I wanted to highlight was that for big clinics, if you want to evolve, you have to participate in clinical trials.
100%.
Because once that medication gets prescribed or is part of the NHS system and you're prescribing it, if you're not part of that clinical trial,
Yeah.
you have no idea how it's going to roll out
Exactly.
operationally
Yeah.
in your clinic.
Yeah. You
'Cause
already
you
know so
need-
much. Yeah.
'cause
Yeah.
now you need more nurses.
Yes.
Now you need how long the patient needs to be in the clinic.
Yes.
To actually
Yes.
do this injection clinic, because it has to be in the clinic,
Yes.
right? So all that site data was at the forefront of all our clinicians,
Yeah.
all our healthcare providers, because we did had a lot of collective meetings
Yes.
together where we shared practices and what's going on in every space, like from pharmacies and the nurses and the doctors and the research teams. So it's important to share all that data.
The reason why I actually brought that study is, from my perspective, stigma in HIV is huge. And in certain culture, stigma is even worse. People don't like to talk about it. And we had patients who were hiding their tablets. You know, they were decanting it into multivitamin bottles or taking the labels off. And because nobody knew.
No.
And some of them worked in countries where you can't take the tablets
I was
because
gonna say,
HIV
the biggest thing was the traveling.
traveling
right?
was a huge issue. And
yeah.
in comes this treatment, and it said, do you know what? We'll get rid of all of this and
Exactly.
we'll just inject you, and it's going to work for
Absolutely.
8 weeks. And it's working fine right now.
Absolutely.
And it wouldn't have been possible
No.
if we hadn't done studies like this.
Absolutely.
It's
And it's important, right? It's important to run these trials. And it's another advancement. And without it, you couldn't have added to the portfolio of all these options that are
That we
available
have.
to our patients. So it's a critical way to conduct it,
I'm sure like all of this didn't come without its challenges, right? You know, and what would you say were some of the challenges of working within your role? And I mean in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of inefficiency in NHS, dealing with big egos. Like, what were your experience in terms of the biggest challenges
I mean,
that you
you
faced?
listed them out. Just get it, what the challenges are, right? And I can imagine living through it. Like, as in, whilst you're doing all of this, but those are the huge challenges. But I think it's important with all those challenges, Abby, like as in, don't get me wrong, even though if we generate revenue, like I say, we, the clinical trial teams, they're still not funded well.
Yeah.
They're still under-resourced, right? And that's because of the infrastructure of NHS and the departments. So as I said, for example, we generated 4 million in COVID research, right?
But it doesn't
Now,
come to
if you
you.
don't have the right person
Yeah.
in that clinical team, that you're not seeing that money.
Right.
That money is not coming from the finance department to the R&D department, and then from R&D department to come back to us.
Where does it go?
Right? You tell me. I mean, this is the huge issue. This is the massive issue that I think almost anybody will speak to in terms of NHS and where it's crippling and what the issue and the problems are with conducting these research studies and inefficiencies. And that leads to inefficiencies, right? Because now you're spending so much more time in bureaucracy and taking the money that you've generated so you can increase the resources in your team. Whereas if that whole process was quite efficient, you can really concentrate on patient care.
That's right.
And direct your energy just in that channel, right? So loads of that.
Do you think, sorry to cut you off, do you think there are too many people making these decisions that there needs to be?
I think they're not enough
Above us.
right people
Right.
making these decisions,
I agree.
right? I think I've thought about this quite a lot, and with my experience, and there's loads of people with way more experience and incredible work that they have done in the NHS. But from my experience of it, yes, we do have a lot of people that making decision. But my issue is not that. My issue is more so, how effective are that? Are they in their roles? How are we holding them accountable for their roles? Right?
Accountability.
I think that is massively lacking. And because that is lacking, then where are we getting ahead with this? With actually solving anything in NHS? Like, and
Because people get paid regardless, you know,
do get paid regardless.
you have a full-time job,
Exactly.
and all the HR laws are actually protecting the staff.
Absolutely.
So there is no incentive to be that efficient, you know? And I really struggle with that as well. But sorry, carry on.
No, but we used to speak about this quite a lot, right? Like, as in, especially around the pandemic and the amount of like you coming from your perspective, your like as the role that you were playing in the pandemic and running from one trust to another, even the limited resources that we had. And I think we did I do enjoy our lunches at that time.
Yes.
And after work catch up.
It used to
and
be like debriefs,
right?
yeah.
That we used to have, and we used to speak quite a lot about it, about how NHS is really surviving on
Goodwill of people.
Yeah, I think we need to change that. We really need to change that goodwill. We can talk about this, but how it's surviving on few individuals who are given like 200 to 300% of their time and
Yes.
energy and everything.
Yes.
But there's loads just floating.
Yes.
Yeah, and
A lot of
who's
floating.
taking accountability for those people who are just floating?
Yes.
And redirecting them,
Yes.
and redirecting that resource.
Yes.
I mean, I would 100% then vote for very senior management and operation. I will vote for it, and I'll spend money on it, but I will make sure that they're effective in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if you're
yeah,
not,
yeah.
then you're just wasting even
What is
more
it?
money.
Exactly. Taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
I'll tell you examples of bureaucracy. And going back to clinical trials. So it takes 10 to 15 years for a molecule or a drug from identification to market launch. 15 years, right?
Yeah.
In terms of clinical trials,
Yeah.
it takes 6 to 7 years just to do trial, and it can be longer if the disease is complex.
Yes.
And then this is great. The regulatory review can take up to 2 years as well, right?
Especially in NHS. Yeah.
Exactly. And all of these things cost more and more money. The more you delay it, the longer you stretch it, the more millions you're adding. And the total cost to bring a new drug to market from identification can range from anywhere between $1 billion to $10 billion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And every pharma person I have spoken to, the money people, they will actually say that there is so much scope of making this process efficient, and that could be so cost saving, and it can be life saving because the drug will come to the market much earlier, but there is so much red tape.
A lot.
It's insane.
I cannot agree with you more,
Yeah.
Abby, especially like working in this field, right? Like it's in working in this field from NHS side. In fact, it doesn't really matter which side you are, even if you're pharma or you're NHS, but the regulation and the amount of time that takes for those reviews to be conducted, it's appalling,
Yeah.
to say the least. Like you say 2 years, I've got so many studies in pipeline, even like in a current given time, that they've been still in a setup for over 2 years for very complicated disease areas and so on, right? And what is that doing? So you're not allowing that drug to move on to the next stage, which is access to that patient.
That's right.
Right?
Who needs the
the
most?
speed of it.
That's right.
Right. Because it's not taking 2 years because it's too complicated to review it. It's taking 2 years because there's inefficiency in the system
Of course.
of how it needs to move on.
Of course.
And then it's like the big, I'm going to say it, the big disaster of Brexit. And
Of course.
And right. And that has
course.
even more complicated a lot of issues in the system for it to adjust to it, for the Brexit to adjust to the regulation that we have. So we've got MHRA.
That's
which
right.
is our regulatory body for clinical trials in the UK. And they had to readjust all their processes post-Brexit to continue with the regulation for any clinical trial coming in the UK.
More
right?
bureaucracy.
More bureaucracy, but then it delayed even more
More,
time during that time for
Yeah.
all the clinical trials, right? So now we're outside the EU CTR, which is the regulation for clinical trials in EU. And I have heard, and there is data coming, that MHRA is becoming more efficient in the way.
I'll see it when I believe it.
Exactly.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Exactly. For it to go through, but yeah, time will tell.
insane. It's
Time
insane.
will tell.
Well, fingers crossed. One always has to be hopeful. But I think if we talk about stuff like this, and if we bring it out, maybe there will be someone listening and saying, oh, actually, hang on a second, we should look into it. Why does it take 15 years for life-saving drug to come out to the market? And can we make this thing more efficient? Because it's for all of us eventually, right?
Yeah.
We can get that disease, and we would be hoping, I hope the drug comes quicker.
Yeah.
But anyways, now we've established how complicated this whole job that you were doing, right? And then you went through a phase in your life and you were like, you know what? I don't think my life is complicated enough. I want to make it more complicated. So you decided to do an MBA, and not just another any MBA. It's like an executive MBA from like one of the biggest business schools in the UK, Bayes Business School. Why did you decide to add MBA on top of your full-time job?
Yeah, Great question. Good timing as well. I mean, I
It's
didn't
COVID.
account. It was COVID.
Mad.
I didn't account for that. I mean, that just happened. It was quite unlucky that it happened to be in 2020 to start with.
Yeah,
And then it was a year of the pandemic.
that's
and
right.
we got more busy than ever whilst I decided to do an MBA. But why? I think I just needed to look beyond and above and expand opportunities for myself, I
Right.
must say. And I feel like when you're in a leadership role, I don't think there is enough to learn, right? So, and I didn't want to go and move up steps without actually being feeling quite equipped in terms of what my next role is. And I think I wanted a big jump as well. I mean, that's a selfish way of looking at it. So I was like, why not? I'm just going to go into MBA. But yeah, and the pandemic happened. I mean, that was quite fortunate, unfortunate, whatever we call it, for the timing of my MBA around that time. But there's a lot that I learned from it. I think it worked quite well simultaneously in terms of what we were doing during the pandemic, as well as doing an MBA at the same time. So it was a
I mean,
blessing in disguise.
first of all, I wouldn't call it selfish. I would call it self-centered. You know, right?
you.
A lot of people like get stuck
Yeah.
and they are not really sure what the next step is.
Yeah.
And all you do is just carry on.
Yeah.
But you were like, no, I need to do something different. And you messed up your weekends because it wasn't
Totally.
It wasn't the weekends, isn't it? You had to do
It was a once a month, like a 4-day role. Of course, it'd be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, full day of studies. But yeah, it took over every single weekend because you had so many assignments.
I have never seen you that stressed, Nargis. You were stressed throughout that time,
I
and
think I just lived in also in ICDC at the time because we were running
Adrenaline.
the COVID trials as well, and
let's talk about COVID.
and doing all of that. Yeah,
Let's talk about COVID, right? So there you are, you have your full-time job as, you know, research manager, and then you have your MBA, which is a completely new area.
Yes.
And then COVID hit, right? And I have not seen enough podcasts or people speaking about what it was like
yeah,
from within the hospital to be working during COVID. You know, I've heard enough people talking about the negative side of COVID to say, you know, how conspiracy theories and all of that stuff. Now, let's just agree that's a whole different game and we can talk about it. But in 2020,
yeah,
we were told as healthcare professionals that, look, there is this virus that is emerging in China, and then it spread to Italy, and we saw the massacre. It happened, and we were told. I remember I was sitting in a big board meeting, and we were told that they did some modeling in Department of Health or somewhere, and they estimated that almost 1 million people could die from COVID in the UK. And as healthcare professionals, you know, we were just looking at each other to say, my God, how can we do our part to save that? Right? So everyone was scared. You have to understand, like, it's not the fact that, oh, we are healthcare professionals or doctors or pharmacists or nurse, we would know what to do. Like, everyone was scared for their life, but we still turned up every single day and we tried to see what can we do for the patients who've come in who are completely helpless, right? And that's where your role even became more important, because we were looking for other drugs. We were looking for, okay, what can we give to patients that's going to save their lives? And whatever people say about vaccines, right? Oh, it causes injuries. It was all wrong. It's fine. But at that time, in that phase, we wanted anything and everything that would come to us that's going to help us save patients. And at that time, vaccine was the flavor, right? And you got lumped with so many studies to say these are the new vaccines, you have to try it. So there you are with your full-time job, with your MBA degree, and you were leading the vaccine studies there as well. What was that like?
Thank you for asking that. I mean, it's been
personally, like, what was that like for
It
you?
already feels like it was a while back, right? And it's nice how you started with the COVID story as well. We are going to take names, so we're going to do another big shout out to
Keep it.
Dr. Sajid Bagani.
Professor Bagani,
He's,
come to the podcast.
Exactly. I think he should be your next guest for sure. I think you should definitely have him on this podcast for sure. But I do remember when the pandemic unfolded, Abby, I mean, it's not just my role. Everybody who was in healthcare center at the time, right? And Sanjay, he's been on BBC program around it as well. And he's one of our leading ID professors and leading on this COVID amongst many others at the Royal Free.
He did great.
And we had a few first patients at the Royal Free. Do you remember that?
Yes.
In one of our wards?
Yes.
And it was
We had-
few.
Can we say it now? I think we can. We looked after one of the very first
Exactly.
COVID patients
Exactly.
in the UK.
Yeah, we're the leading trust, and we've got one of the first patients here. And I do remember trying to, I'm sure you remember this as well, catching up with Sanjay afterwards about like what is unfolding, like what do we know about the disease and how it's doing. And because COVID was just like, it was a random selection. Nobody knew who's affecting the most.
Yeah.
Or who is going
At
to
that time,
survive
we knew
it,
nothing. We
who's
knew
going to
nothing.
feel it like a cold and then they're going to be fine, and who's going to need these ventilators and go through that whole journey that they did, right?
It was so difficult.
It was so difficult.
It was so difficult.
All unfolded in a matter of weeks. Things started changing and changing.
Too quick.
And we were at the center of it. Like we were seeing it
Yes.
from a hospital's
Yes.
perspective, right? And that was scary.
Scary.
It was so scary. I
Yeah.
think that was my first thing. Like I was scared for my family,
Yes.
our parents.
Yes.
And slowly the whole story around Asian
Yes.
people with diabetes and
Yes.
blood pressure,
Obese,
obese,
elderly.
and come on, I'm so Asian and I've got very Asian parents, and you name all these
We were
diseases and they
scared.
have it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And now you're so scared for them, right? Yes, and all of that was unfolding, and it was just at a speed that was unmanageable
It was
to
insane.
maintain.
It's
or
unlike
control.
NHS has ever seen.
Nothing
terms
like
of
it that you've
speed,
seen,
yeah.
right? But I haven't personally at that time getting involved. I haven't felt more pride
That's right.
in my job,
That's right.
in my colleagues, in my friends around me at the time,
Yeah.
in the NHS. And I felt an insane amount of pride for what we're doing and where we are, and what are we contributing, and how much we're going above and beyond to actually do what we need to do at the time.
We fought hard.
Yeah, and I come from managerial sector, which is, and I acknowledge it, but I worked very closely with these consultants and these doctors and pharmacists.
Yeah, yeah.
You, Abby, and the nurses. Oh my God, I was so proud of them.
Yeah.
So that was the
Yeah,
immediate
yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
But then, yeah, we needed a fix. We needed a fix, and we needed it quick. And we needed a new invention. I think COVID did lead to, and we can talk about this, innovation quite
That's
a lot.
right. Yeah.
Quite a lot. Like
Yeah.
as in, and I think that's when we stepped into, there was a sense of like a work that I need to do this. I've been selected by one of the consultants, which is Fiona Burns, Professor Fiona Burns.
Shout out to Professor Fiona Burns.
Phenomenal
Yes.
person to work with, alongside Margaret Johnson, for example. These are the likes, and I'd like to say these names because they did contribute huge amount,
Of course.
right? And it was these guys coming together and coming up with these ideas that we need to do something,
Yeah.
right? And that's where, yes, I did work incredibly closely
Yeah.
with Fiona at the time to build up, because we didn't have a center.
Yeah.
We didn't have the resource.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we
Like,
didn't
How
have
did
the
you?
okay, so we had zero, like nothing. There was no resource.
Wow.
We had no idea where to start, right? How much are we given, for example?
Money.
But
yeah.
but few of these stakeholders that I mentioned, they were adamant we have to run it at the Royal Free because we don't have this. And UCL had it, which was just down the road from us. So I remember having a visit at the site just to understand the logistics and operations of it. And then myself with Fiona at the time, we took that task on, like, right, we need to sit down with R&D and we need to plan it. We planned it from scratch, basically,
Insane.
in terms of this is the amount of money that we need, this is the amount of resources that we need. And we had to recruit a huge number of participants in such a short time frame. That was scary at the time. Like, how do you make sure that everything is done robustly and safely?
And how do you keep the morale of the team as well?
Morale of the team and get everybody together. But Abby, I think one thing that COVID has taught me, and around that time and that whole experience, that NHS doesn't lack intelligent people.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're full of innovative people.
Yeah.
And when suddenly all attention was at COVID, now trials are setting up at Godspeed, like
Yes.
so fast.
Red
We
tapes are
can do
gone.
it.
Yes.
So we
Bureaucracy
can
is
do it,
gone.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We're allowed to think outside the box to
Yes.
create efficiency, so we can do it.
Yes.
Right? There was funding that was coming and we were generating it
Yes.
through that. So it was all achievable. And I feel like the morale kept high because people saw output.
Yes.
There was an output that was getting produced from the work that they were doing.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's NHS. And I feel like NHS does run on a lot of
Yes.
like intrinsic motivation that they have, all our staff. But again, we need to learn to look beyond it and above it. So
I think
it was a
yeah, you guys worked incredibly hard, and every name that you've given, I am just so proud to be associated
Yes.
with those people. And you just literally hit the nail on the head, because I was so surprised to say, wow, the speed, the efficiency with which we were trying to see patients and actually generate those outcomes, it's all there.
absolutely.
You know, like and those red tapes, they don't need to be there, you know. But were you worried about speed versus efficiency at any point?
I think everybody was.
Right.
I think it would be not fair to say that we weren't as part of delivering to these clinical trials. And we had, for example, like you talked about the time that clinical trial takes from drug idea to actually marketing. It's 15
years.
And now you turn that into like within a year and a half. It's a big speed that we're
Yes.
working at. So of course, and I think, but then that worry keeps you excited to make sure you're doing the right thing. Make
Yeah.
sure you are forming the processes that are safe for our patients. Make sure we have enough personnel to collect that data that we need to collect. So actually then create a very informed decision about these vaccinations, right? So yeah, the worry was there, but then we needed to work even harder to make sure that we're giving the attention that all
That is
these
required.
incredible participant required,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it took a lot of bravery and you needed these
Yes.
participants. If without
Yes.
them, you couldn't have done this.
Yes.
But I think I was mind blown by the efficiency and the innovation during pandemic. And I know you touched on it. I think a lot of people do speak about all the negative. And Abby, I'm not a clinician and I haven't worked on the clinical side. So I wouldn't say informed, but I'm not qualified enough to answer intelligently to that part. But from clinical trials perspective, I think I saw great innovation and I thought this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
This is how we need to continue to grow.
Yes. I think what happened is after COVID, the voices that were on the negative side actually grew very louder, and people who were within the NHS didn't really say a lot. Is
Yes.
that behind every healthcare professional's title, there was a human being
Yeah.
that was trying to help their fellow human being and
Yes.
trying to save them from dying.
Yeah.
You know, I saw some doctors literally doing 14 hours, 15 hours, 16 hours, going home, sleeping for a bit and coming back. You know, there was a stretch where I felt like I was at home at all because I was constantly either on my phone or I was at work. And there are like so many examples of like nurses, doctors, like we worked so hard
Yeah.
to try and save so many lives.
Yeah.
And that I feel like nobody's out there just saying it out loud enough
Yeah.
to say that you can talk about all the negative stuff. We can talk about where did the COVID come from and thing. But to us, it didn't matter at that time. What
No.
mattered to us was thousands of sick patients who were on the ward and what can we do to help,
Yeah,
hoping that
Yeah.
somebody would do the same for us.
exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
What a time. COVID was
It
insane.
was. No,
Character building.
Absolutely. And I think you nailed it. And I think it did lead to some positive changes in terms of
Yeah.
trials. And I think people's perception of commercial trials is very different now. People's perception of the conversation around clinical trials is very different now. I think that information has filtered to many
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
So a lot more people know about these things that we do in a teaching, leading NHS trust, for example. So there's some positivity in a hindsight that came out of it. But yeah, it was
Mad.
challenging.
It was
times.
challenging.
Yeah.
Character building.
Yeah.
Then what happened is you decided that you were going to go for your next career move and you left NHS and then you went to pharma. Now, I know you're currently working there and it's a relatively new area, but you've been there for a year now, right?
More than a year.
More than a year. How is working in a team in pharma different to working in a team in the NHS?
It's a very like a strict interview question, but huge differences.
Yeah.
Right? Like as in huge differences. Where do I start? That's how I should say it.
Talk about efficiency and accountability, because you said accountability.
And I think that is the it's very structured. The pharma side is incredibly structured. But again, I would say the structure comes from insane amount of money as well.
Right.
You cannot not talk about the money and resource and the opportunities that they have.
Yeah.
But because of the money and resource and the opportunities they have, it is, I've always talked about this. I was like, it's a small, simple steps, but it's replicating it constantly and every day that's building success for them.
Creating a system that works.
Creating a system, and it's doing the small things. It's not about, for any one role, it's not about the big leap that you need to take. You don't need to create a big idea on it, but they've built a process and a system in a way that you just replicate and you continue to work in that manner that actually creates what they want to achieve out of it, right? I don't know, the other way to look at it, if it's like putting Lego pieces together.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But there's so much resource there.
Right.
There's so many people there. And they all are picking one piece of Lego and they keep building it. And this whole gigantic thing is formed, which is the pharmaceutical company or a pharmaceutical sector. But it's the accountability.
They hold accountable.
You are held accountable.
Yeah.
You're not getting paid for not creating the output, right? It's a very metric-based system.
Yes.
If we can call it that.
KPIs.
Yeah.
It's all about KPIs, you know? Yeah.
Very cleanly, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to be held accountable to make sure that you deliver to it.
Yeah.
So it's very process-driven. It's a huge amount of accountability. I think that's a key difference with working in NHS. And I think if that changed in NHS, it will do wonders as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And I think it's the end product.
Absolutely.
In terms of what resource I'm giving you, what the output is, and can you define define that output, B, make sure you reach that goal to actually
be specific and time
right?
oriented.
Yeah.
And somebody should be held accountable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I've had a fantastic NHS career.
Yeah. Definitely.
Honestly, like even working with people in NHS, it's a very different way of continuing to keep them motivated, because there's only certain level that a lot of people can go up to.
Yeah.
You're working in a very different environment. It's non-for-profit environment.
Exactly.
Right? You take pride in what you're doing and what you're achieving and what you're giving to patients.
Yes.
Those are the kind of people that you're working in. So that's the mindset you need to continue to have, right?
Yes.
To work with them. And I feel like you've got a lot more flexibility.
Yes.
So it depends what kind of manager you are, or what kind of clinician you are, or what kind of nurse or a pharmacist or anything that you are. What you do with your time, you have more control of it.
Right.
Which is a benefit.
Right.
But I hope people can see it as a benefit as well, so they can do something good out of it.
Yeah.
But if you don't do much with it as well, you can get away with it.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's a shame.
How many meetings we've sat in where things have not gone right and everybody else is looking at their faces, and then you move on to the next agenda.
Who's doing this?
Who's, without any accountability. And, we actually talk about inefficiency in the NHS because we love the NHS. We want to save the NHS. We want to keep the NHS running for as long as possible. But it's important to talk about this stuff so that something can be done about it, right?
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, they're scared of having the real conversation, which is money.
Yes.
Yeah, which is actually
resources.
Motivation beyond goodwill.
Yes.
Like, can we stop talking about goodwill, and can we stop employing people on goodwill?
Yes.
And can we stop keep telling them that you're doing this for goodwill?
Yes.
Because it's going to run out.
Incentivize people. Yeah, incentivize the right people.
They've got bills to pay.
Exactly.
And they've got homes to go to, right? So how do you sustain it and maintain it?
And keep talent within the NHS. How do you do that?
Do you do that?
Yes.
Because that's massively lacking.
Yes. Our friend Gavin, the great cardiologist, like how intelligent he was.
Of course.
And guess what? He immigrated to Australia.
Absolutely.
He took his entire family there because he basically said that it's not sustainable.
Absolutely not.
And what a tragic loss that is. And then you times it with God knows how many thousands of people who are leaving.
Exactly that. by
It's-
how many people
it's
who
a brain drain.
Exactly. And Abby, we're talking about a smaller sector within NHS, which is research, and that's what we're talking about. And I have experience and seen it. And as you said, in fact, research is revenue generation rather than cost implicated service for NHS. And yet you see all of this. Can you imagine what it is like to work on a ward?
Yeah.
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 Or with these incredible doctors that we have working tirelessly
Nurses.
round the clock.
Nurses. Shout out
And
to all the
all
nurses.
that- And to all the nurses
Yeah.
and all healthcare professionals, from our porters, everybody in
Yes.
that system, and how they are drained and worked for what?
Yeah.
Right? And I don't think you can continue to motivate because it's becoming quite risky. Their job is quite risky.
Yeah.
It's very short-staffed, so they're not giving the patient output that they want to,
Yeah.
right? Which actually demotivates you even more because
100%.
you know you're not doing a good enough job with that
100%.
patient because you are so
You could do better.
stretched out.
Yeah.
And how do you do this? So, yeah, it needs to change. A
It
lot
needs to change.
But how?
Talking about it will change, and you have to start conversation. Well, I googled you, Nargis, and then and then I came across a quote that you said, and it's on Bayes Business School profile, and you said, I quote, "I didn't want to go step by step. I wanted to take a leap." Tell me more about that philosophy there. What did you mean when you said that?
I find it quite uncomfortable talking about me.
I know, that's why I'm asking you.
It's so much more comfortable talking about system and structure and what's
know.
going on everywhere. I think, Abby, you know me enough so I can say this to you. I need jumps in life as well.
You're an ambitious person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. Like as in there's a
It's a great thing, by the way.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay. Are we gonna see it like that?
We need ambitious people in the world.
And I think my time in NHS, I think it's that intrinsic motivation that we talked about, it runs out at some point.
100%.
Right? And you need to
100%.
identify that.
100%.
This is what I was trying to say. And I think this is when you lose,
Yes.
not myself, but incredible leaders.
I left because I ran out of it. Yeah.
Exactly. You run out of it.
Yeah.
You will do it for enough.
Yeah.
I've done it for about 10 years.
Yeah.
How long have you done it for?
16,
16,
going 17.
Exactly, right? Long enough that we've done it. And then it reached a point like, okay, what's next? What am I building any bigger change here? Am I adding any more value? Because I reached a point at the Royal Free where I did employ a few people working under me, and of course train them and so on. And at one point I reflected, I was like, okay, these girls can do my job.
Right.
What I'm doing right now, I think I've trained enough people to do that.
Right.
Right? So what's next for me? Right? And then because of that bureaucracy, and you have to take one step at a time, and that's how they encourage you. And I was like, I can't do this. So for me, it was like, it needs to be a big jump, and it needs to be a jump in another direction and something new. So
new challenge.
Yeah. So then I jumped into pharma.
Looking back at your career so far, what would you say, what moment or achievement are you most proud of? Professionally.
Professionally, my biggest pride would be running the COVID center, vaccine, all of that we did. And I think the number of patients we gave access to vaccine at the time where there was no vaccine.
Right.
Right. So there was like 600 plus participants that we recruited.
High risk individuals, basically.
Yeah, we recruited at the time, and they had access to those vaccination. But then, and the team that we built, and then the income that we generated at the time. But I think for me, that was a big challenge. That was a next level growth for me, even character-wise, as well as what we did at the trust level as well. So, yeah, I take pride in that.
And so you should, I think. What would you say to a young female professional who is taking things step by step, want to take a leap, but is scared because they are either stuck or they're not sure what to do?
Yeah, I would say, don't be scared of change. And I think change is a very scary concept.
Yeah.
Right? And I feel like the more scared you are, And the more changes you're having, you're growing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will say to them, don't stay at one point and explore your options, but equally stay enough in one place so you could learn,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Build
yeah, yeah.
yourself that foundation. But once you have built it, just keep moving
Yeah.
and embrace new changes. And that's the only way you can challenge yourself and you can grow.
Don't be scared.
Don't be scared of change.
Change and
Yeah,
then just
change,
go ahead.
yeah.
I like that. I like that. Last part, Nargis, of this podcast. I call it Dose of Health. So if I gave you a magic wand called Dose of Health,
Yeah.
and you can wave it and make one change in the NHS that can be completely transformational, what would that change be?
That's a lot of power.
Yeah. You can wave it
Can you
and change
imagine?
one thing that's going to bring a lot of change. What would you change?
I will sack all incompetent leaders. I will 100% do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Shots fired.
I honestly think that is the only way you're going to have big changes. Change the top.
Yes.
Change the top
Yes.
and create great incentive for those people to stay
You're
and
working hard.
and then actually, yeah, who knows how to motivate teams? Who knows how to
Yeah.
build money? Who
Yes.
knows how to give the best patient care
Yes.
in the trust,
Yes.
right?
Who are not just on
So
Instagram
who-
laughing and
no,
smiling
who
and taking
knows
photos.
leadership, finance, and healthcare, the combination of it. And I don't think we have it.
No.
So if it was a one thing and a first step, then yeah, I'll just fire them.
Wow. I think, you know what, something like that needed to be said. And I had dealt with a lot of,
What would you do? I want to know this.
what would I do?
Yeah, what would you change? You've worked like 16 years in NHS.
Yeah.
And actually it led you to
Yeah.
your, as you said, you mentioned that you exited because
Yeah.
of whatever's going on. But
I'll
if you had to change one thing from your perspective, what would you do?
You know, I've actually thought about it very extensively, and it's very easy for us to look at somebody and say, actually, you know what, he and she is very shit at their job. And then what I did was I got rid of my preconceived notion and I went and spoke to that person, or I looked around. And then I found out that person has a manager who she thinks exactly the same, that they are doing a very shit job. And then you look into that person and you find out there is another person above it. There's another person above it. There's another person above it. And then I went backwards and backwards and backwards. Okay, what's causing this? What's causing this? What's causing this? Where I stopped and where I think you should start with is HR. You should change the HR laws that stops protecting people who are underperforming.
Absolutely.
You know, and don't wait for 25 complaints
Yeah.
before you say, okay, it is time for you to go.
Yeah.
I think as soon as you recognize a pattern, you should hold that person accountable. And you know how difficult it is to sack someone in the NHS? Like, have you heard of anyone who's
No
ever
one.
been sacked?
No one.
Exactly. And why is that? Because of the HR laws, right?
Yeah.
And I went through a process, and you know about it.
Yeah.
I went through a process where a person did eventually was told to leave, but that process took 2 years, if not more, and it was agonizing for everybody, and everyone knew
Yeah.
that person was at fault because there were so many complaints, right? And
Yeah.
I was told, don't talk about this, keep it quiet. And whereas that person just went around and actually said so much crappy things about me. So the point is, you have to change the HR laws so that it promotes meritocracy.
Yeah.
You know, rather than just saying, oh, we're so inclusive that anybody and everybody can just sit and work and do whatever they want. Like, you need to get rid of that.
Yeah.
And people who actually do well, you should incentivize them, whether it's better bonus, whether it's better increment, like give them something to stay. Because like you said, after one point, your goodwill runs out.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a big difference between, you asked me about pharma and NHS. You don't hear NHS people getting sacked for the bad job that they have done.
Yeah.
Whereas it is so easy, no matter how much you get paid or where you are, it's so easy for you to be sacked on the other side, right?
In pharma.
And I genuinely think, I honestly think, and it's a very different political views that people share, depends where we are. and respectfully, and I respect all those views, right? But I feel like NHS need to adapt a slightly middle ground, okay?
Yeah.
So all the goodwill that we're doing, let's do it for the patients.
Right.
Yeah?
Right.
Let's have this amazing institution that we should all be so proud of.
Yes.
That we're giving free healthcare, and
Yes.
it is a human right. We should continue giving it.
100%
Let's
agree.
do this. Right?
100% agree.
Let's keep it. Let's change the other side of it,
Yeah.
which is
The bureaucracy. side.
bureaucracy and who we're hiring and what accountability do people hold and what are the KPIs. We should have KPIs. We
Yes.
should have metrics.
Yes.
We should have systems.
Yes.
We should invest in all of those things.
Yes.
And we should hold people accountable for those
Yes.
things, right?
Yes.
And I think we have just taken this view of it's all goodwill
Yeah.
and it's all intrinsic motivation, and that's why amazing people are working down here. No, let's change that crap and let's just rebuild it differently.
Make NHS efficient.
Absolutely.
Nargis, this is exactly why I asked you for this podcast, and I can tell you, you have not disappointed.
Thank you.
It was. How was it for you? How was it for you?
That was a great experience. You did say to forget about it, that we're talking to a camera or anything like that, but it's more
It's just
like
going to be us.
Yeah, but it's so comfortable always talking to you, Abby. Maybe that's why I couldn't say no to you. So thank you for having me. You're
Nargis,
doing great.
thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.